Hi everyone, welcome to the Space Science webinar series hosted by the Center for Space Science at NYU Abu Dhabi in collaboration with the UAE Space Agency. It is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Noemi Globus. She's based at the ELI Beamlines in the Czech Republic. She got her PhD at Paris Observatory. Then she moved to Israel and did postdocs at Tel Aviv University and Hebrew University. Then she moved to New York and did postdocs at NYU and Flatiron Institute Center for Computational Astrophysics, CCA. She still holds that affiliation. She has visiting positions at Stanford and Riken in Japan. So Noemi, welcome to our center, and I am handing over the mic to you.
Okay, thank you so much for this introduction. So, so I will talk about the chiral puzzle of life, and I will try to make the connection between the images you see on this presentation slide. So cosmic ray showers, here you have DNA, and here you have interaction mediated by the weak interaction. So the focus on the talk would be actually to make the connection between those. So I will start with introduction, historical introduction. So I'm French. So, I mean, I like to say that everything started here with wine, and more precisely with the tartaric acid, which is deposited in cask during wine fermentation. So you see a picture of it here. And it was back in 1769 that this tartaric acid was studied by Schill, which was the first one to examine it. And I will come back why this was actually important. So there was other substances that was showing optical activity and that were studied by Jean-Baptiste Biot, who was trying to understand what was causing this optical activity. So just I mean, I think everybody knows this, but to make you understand is now we know that is actually linked to the difference in the propagation of circularly polarized light in a medium, but the linearly polarized light is a combination of two circularly polarized light of different helicities. So what they witness is that while they were taking samples of organic molecules, some of them were turning the plane of linearly polarized light to the right, and some of them were turning the plane of linearly polarized light to the left. So that was the first manifestation of this optical activity. And that was actually the first experiment. Then it was understood that also the substances actually absorb differentially circularly polarized light as well. But in 1815, then Jean-Baptiste Biot was wondering what caused this plane of polarized light to rotate. And one of the answers was actually brought by Pasteur, that was actually making experiments on this tartaric acid. So here you see a drawing by Pasteur, and he was studying a kind of tartaric acid, which was a natural, not the one that you found in wine. And he witnessed that in the crystals, you have two types of crystals, and they look like a mirror image of one another. So with a tweezer, he actually managed to make the first enantiomeric separation of a racemic mixture of these two types of crystals. And he showed to Jean-Baptiste Biot that one type of the crystals turn light to one direction, and the opposite one turn light to the opposite direction, the plane of polarized light. And Jean-Baptiste Biot was, very moved by this experiment. He told to Pasteur that he loves physics all his life that much that this moves him very much, this experiment. So that was the first, real experiment on on optical activities, and also so the one that was turning the plane of polarized light to the right was called with a plus sign, and it was the tartaric acid that was identical to the Scheele's tartaric acid, the one that comes from natural warm fermentation. So just as also an introduction of the basic life building blocks for those that, I mean, I will go fast about this, but I think it's necessary to make a very small introduction of 2 slides about this. So there are, of course, other building blocks, and we know very well that the main building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So there are 20 that are typically used by living systems. And when you make them in laboratory, so in this first experiment that we're trying to make the prebiotic soup with amino acids. So the well-known Miller-Urey experiment, when you make this experiment, you get actually half amino acids that are right-handed and half of them that are left-handed. So this is not the case, as you know, in a living organism. We are only using the left-handed ones. And what we witnessed also, and it was a bit of a puzzling constatation, is that in some meteorites, very subclass of meteorites, which is called carbonaceous chondrites, some of them present an enantiomeric excess. So enantiomeric excess defined by the number of right-handed amino acid minus the number of left-handed amino acid over the total. And here you see that actually some of them have even enantiomeric excesses as high as 15 to 20%. So of course there are error bars, and meteorites are also subject to earth contamination. But I will come back to this because there are now special missions that are made to measure in situ the enantiomeric excess in other bodies of the solar system, comets and asteroids. But the thing is that in living system, we only use in the building blocks of protein one type of amino acid. And these are coded, as you know well, by DNA and RNA, the nucleic acids, that also use one type of sugars, the right-handed one. So here, left and right are human conventions. So it's not like the opposite thing. It's really like related to some chemical definitions. So for amino acids, it's the Korn rule, and for the DNA and RNA is for the ribose, and deoxyribose is the Fischer rule. But the thing is that you could have the mirror image form of life, because nothing would, I mean, a priori prevent it to have form, right? So we could have used left-handed sugars and right-handed amino acid, but in a living system, we only find one type. And more interestingly, so, and for DNA, which is a guarantor of genetic information, if you insert only one single wrong-handed nucleotide in this helical structure of RNA or DNA, it will destabilize the helix. And this is not good, right? Because you need stability to be able to transmit the genetic information from one generation to the next. So this homochirality, I would say, is one very important part of the definition of life, because it also allows the molecules that are guarantor of the genetic information to be stable. So what broke this biological mirror, and why are we using only one set of the molecules? So Pasteur made, I would say, anticipation. It's not a prediction because it was in 1848, but he said that if the molecules of life are dissymmetric, it must be due to some asymmetry in the fundamental laws, so in the cosmic laws, in the laws of physics. And this was 1 century before the discovery of the parity violation of the weak interaction. So this is why I'm saying it's actually a nice anticipation. And as you know, in 1957, there was this discovery, and then people started to really think about this possible connection between parity violation in the weak interaction and the asymmetry that we witness in the biological molecules. So this is a table that actually summarizes what has been done experimentally. So as I said, when the parity violation in the weak interaction was discovered, people tried to put the weak neutral currents in the Hamiltonian of the molecules to calculate the energy levels and to see if there is actually energy difference between left-handed amino acid in water and in right-handed amino acid in water, for example. So this is putting this weak neutral currents in the Hamiltonian and see if there is a difference. And what was reported is that it's actually very, very small. So these PVED are something like 10 to the minus 17 over KT. And so there was, of course, it involves a weak interaction, but it's so small that you will need some amplification mechanism that has not been found yet, but it's investigated even now by several groups. And it was first advocated by Abdus Salam and other authors, but this is like if there was maybe a possibility to have a phase transition in which would be induced by this parity violating energy differences. But I said theory only because until now, this has not been shown to work in laboratory experiments. Then because, as I said at the beginning, you have this optical activity, meaning that the two enantiomers will absorb differently the circularly polarized light of different helicities. Then there were groups that tried to actually make enantiomeric excess by illumination by ultraviolet circularly polarized light, so UVCPL. And this actually is working. So these are the group by the Marcellus, Louis Dandecourt, and others. So at the Synchrotron Soleil in France. So this, I mean, because I know this. These people, so, but there are other groups that try to do it as well. And what they witness is that you have a differential destruction because, of course, this is UV. So you destroy mostly all your molecules, like 99%, but the remaining fraction shows an enantiomeric excess, something like of the order of 2.5 or even 3%. So this is shown to work. And the sign of the excess, if you get actually more left-handed or right-handed amino acid, it depends on the chirality of the light, of course, if it's circularly polarized left or right, but also on the photon energy. So they did it at two different energies for the photon, 6.2 electron volts and 10.2 electron volts, and actually the sign changes. So if you want to come up with an astrophysical scenario that explain why there is an excess in the prebiotic soup with circularly polarized UV light, you need to also invoke a source, I mean, with a very narrow waveband. So, but okay, that is reported in laboratory experiment. Then people also try to connect it with, of course, irradiation with a beta decay product because they are mediated by the weak interaction. So it will also cause differential destruction. It also depends on the spin polarization of the radiation, but this is not has been shown to lead to strong excesses, and some of them are controversial. So this is less actually, I mean, the excesses that have been shown in laboratory as less than the UVCPL. And people try also to do enantioselective chemistry. So now with low energy spin polarized electron, the energy is smaller than 10 electron volts typically, and you have the chemical reactions that are induced. They also depend on the spin polarization and on the electron energy, but you actually get an effect, which is also of the order of 1%. But then it's a bit difficult to link this to the weak interaction. So here are the authors. So this was to summarize for the prebiotic. So prebiotic meaning that you want to make an excess in the amino acid, or for example, in the sugar, which are the building blocks of the helical biopolymers. But then you would need a second step because what we get is quite small excesses. So even if it's something in the order of 3%, you need some amplification mechanism to lead to homochirality. So then you have what I call transbiotic, because it could be biological, and it could be, I mean, it has to involve a helical structure. So there is one effect which is observed since more than a decade. It's called the chiral-induced spin selectivity effect. And so, I mean, it was investigated first by Naaman and collaborators, but there are also people in University of Utah that are working on this, and maybe other, that I apologize if I don't know everyone that work on this. But the thing is that if you take a helical molecule now, so double-stranded DNA or alpha helical structure of a protein, it has been shown that they act as spin filters for low energy spin polarized electron, and they make actually only one spin polarization to pass, to traverse the helical molecule. So this is investigated also theoretically. I think it's not totally understood yet, this effect, but the spin polarization that you get is quite high. It's something like, it can even reach 90%. And this is really linked to the helical structure of the molecule. So it's not only for, I mean, it will not work for just a primordial soup of amino acid and sugar. You need to have already polymerized biopolymer. So, and then I mean, I'm going to talk in the rest of my presentation is this model that we advocated for homochiralization, which is actually the fact that you have some spin polarized component in the natural cosmic radiation. So this is why I'm going to talk about, and we know that cosmic ray act as a chiral, act as an evolutionary pressure, right? Because they induce mutations, and mutations are needed for evolutions of the evolution of the living organism. And then if you have a component which is spin polarized, then the question is, can we have an enantioselective mutagenesis? So meaning that you would induce a very small bias in the mutation rate because of this spin polarization. And so I will explain a bit this model, but of course it has not been tested yet. So about this transbiotic scenario, so you have here, I mean, a sketch of what we think could happen. But again, I mean, these are just theoretical calculations. So first you need to define molecular chirality. So if you have a molecule, so this is a physical point of view, you have a distribution of charges, and you have also, you could have magnetic moments. So you could have an electromagnetic chirality, just because you could have a distribution that will give you a dipole, electrical dipole moments dotted with the magnetic dipole moment, which would reverse sign in a mirror. This is a pseudoscalar. You can also just have chirality, which we call electrostatic chirality, just in the distribution of charges themselves. So if you have a helical structure like DNA, you can construct a pseudoscalar with this 3 vector, and you will have the opposite sign for the opposite helicity. And then the distribution of charges will be like a Barbour pole. So you have a potential minimum and maximum, but it will follow this helical structure. So it will be opposite for left-handed DNA and right-handed DNA. And this is this M, this molecular chirality. And you could have actually polymerized the 2 different types of biopolymer at the beginning of life. We don't know what was causing the transition from inert to living, But if you have some process that lead to polymerization, like wet dry cycles, you would have fluctuations that will lead to polymers of opposite helicity. And then magic happened and you started to self-replicate. But if you need the mutation also for evolution, then if you have spin polarized cosmic ray, as I will show in the next slide, you have only one sign of ludacity. What we call ludacity is the product of the magnetic moment, the dot product of the magnetic moment and the velocity vector of the particle. And this on average is always on the same sign in the cosmic radiation. So this is how we would actually have the chiral preference. It would be expressed as the product of the molecular chirality and this ludacity. And even if the effect we would get, and we show it's quite small, the thing is that if you have already self-replicating system, you know that they will, grow exponentially. So then even a very small bias, if you introduce it permanently, because cosmic ray are irradiating us all the time, then after some homochirization timescale, you will need to the dominance of one form over the other. So this is a testable idea. We can also perform laboratory experiment, and this has not been performed yet. These laboratory experiments are all on prebiotic chemistry, so involving many amino acids or sugars. But the thing is that if you have bacteria, there were no experiments that I know, and I was looking for it, that use even, for example, circularly polarized light on bacteria to see if the different helicity would lead to a different biological response. This has not been done. And same for spin polarized electrons or muons. So the idea would be to test it and to see if actually the mutation rate of bacteria is affected or not by, and the growth rate by the fact that the radiation would be spin polarized. So now I will come to the connection with astrophysics and the connection to cosmic rays. So as you may know, cosmic rays induce this big air showers. So this is an illustration of a cosmic ray shower on Earth. This is taken from the Pierre Roget Observatory website. You have here a water tank. And so, I mean, at the highest energy that we can get, 10 to the 20, typically electron volts, it's over 100 billions of particles that are created in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere acts as a spin filter. So just for illustration, because it will not be the same on other bodies, and I will come to this also later, but you have here Earth in solid lines, Mars in dashed, and Titan in dotted. And you see that on Earth, actually you have the development of the shower, the atmospheric depth of the shower maximum is something around 4 kilometers above ground. But for Mars, because the atmosphere is thinner, the shower doesn't have time to develop. So you do not get this secondary muon that are dominating on Earth at ground level. And this is actually the polarized component of the cosmic rays. Why? Because they are coming from two-body decay. So they're coming from pion decay, and they involve weak interaction, and one of the product is a neutrino. So the fact that it's a neutrino has, almost no mass, so it's almost chiral. And the muon, which is ejected in the pion rest frame, depending if it's a positive or a negative muon, it will have his spin aligned or anti-aligned with the velocity vector. So you have both, you have a charge ratio in cosmic ray shower, so you have more positive muons than negative muon, but we are interested in the ludacity because this is our chiral bias is mediated by the magnetic moment in this model, not the spin. And as you know, the magnetic moment is the gyromagnetic ratio times the spin, so it involves the charge. So at the end, you end up with the magnetic moment, which is always anti-aligned with the velocity vector for both negative and positive muons. So this quantity is on average, right? Because this is in the Pi-on-Rest frame. In the lab frame, you have both because you need to Lorentz boost it to see what you get at ground. But on average, you always have more, I mean, one ludicity, which is only of the same sign, and it will be the same in all the bodies when the muons component has actually time to develop. So what we did now to calculate the effect, we consider DNA, and we follow the cosmic ray trajectory perturbately. So we don't know what really, we are not biologists, so we don't really know, but we know that mutations are caused by ionization. So what we try to see if how big is the difference in the ionization rate between left-handed and right-handed DNA. And so we treated really ionization as a proxy for mutation. And of course, reality is, I mean, the biological reality must be more complicated than this. But it was just to see, I mean, what would be the effect. So we treated the electrostatic potential of DNA as a Barber pole. Again, this M would be opposite sign for a left-handed helix and a right-handed helix. And we introduced this mutability, which is the probability per unit length to act on the mutation. And I will not enter into the detail of the calculation, but the thing that is important is that if you consider an unperturbed trajectory, you don't have a spin polarized cosmic ray. You only have the Lorentz force. But then if you have spin polarized cosmic ray, you have this term, which is similar to a Stern-Gerlach term. This is the magnetic moment here. And this is like the magnetic field that is seen by the cosmic ray. And then this is what would be your perturbed trajectory because of this term. So then you need to consider, of course, the impact factor, and you need to average over all possible angles because in real life, the molecules will not be aligned. They will be in random positions. So then what we did is that we calculate the difference in probability for ionizing, and we get something which is quite small. 10 to the minus 6 for KV spin polarized electrons, and 10 to the minus, up to 10 to the minus 10. So it's very small for MEV muons. But the thing that we did not, this was really like, let's say, a proof of concept model, but we did not treat it, the molecule quantum mechanically. And also, these molecules are not sitting in vacuum. So we should consider really, now we should work with biologists to understand what is really the effect of spin polarized radiation on the evolution of a living system. But it was just to show that we have a small effect. So of course, even a very small difference, like 10 to the minus 8 or 10 would be amplified by the fact that the evolution of living system, the growth is exponential. But the thing that does it has enough time, and if there is a conflict, for example, between the right and the left, if you introduce right-handed amino acid, for example, in the living system that we know at Earth, in bacterial environment, we know that it will affect the growth. So all this biological aspect, of course, we did not consider, but this is, one of our goals is to investigate this in the near future. So the cosmic radiation is a small bias, but it's persistent. It has an evolutionary pressure hole, and now we want to see if it would be possible to test this in laboratory experiment. So as I said at the beginning, when I showed the air shower in different environments, I showed Mars, the Earth, and Titan. This model will also depend on the environment because you need the muon component to have time to develop. So we are looking also for biosignature, and we are looking for enantiomeric excesses in different environments as well. So this might be connected. As I said, the meteorites that shows these enantiomeric excesses, they are subject to Earth contamination. So one of the goals of the space mission that were sent to analyze the organic compounds that are found on different bodies of the solar system was to actually see if there is any enantiomeric excess at all. One of them is the well-known Rosetta mission. Unfortunately, as you may know, so this was sent on a comet, but the lander, Philae here, he bounced on the surface and he found himself in a dark zone. So when the solar panels opened, they didn't work, and we couldn't actually measure this enantiomeric excess. But we have 2 other missions. So now for bringing back sample from asteroids, and one of them came back already. It was in the news, so it's the JAXA mission, the Japanese mission Hayabusa 2, and there will be OSIRIS-REx, the NASA mission as well. OSIRIS-REx will come back in 2023, and they were sent to 2 asteroids, and Ryugu for Hayabusa 2 and Bennu for OSIRIS-REx. And the last 6th of December, Hayabusa returned, and we have already some organic, maybe molecules that are now being analyzed. I haven't heard any news from since then, but so one of the goals is also to see if there are enantiomeric excesses. So this is for asteroids. There is a question if you could actually also have found life on Mars, on early Mars, and if it could have survived until now, because we discovered recently in 2019 that there is some lake underground, so at 1.5 kilometers beneath the surface. And I mean, our collaborator, David Dimmer, said that if you have some process that could enable this wet-dry cycling, as I said, then you could have maybe polymerized, and then the early Mars could have actually be one body where you could have polymerization and maybe the transition from inert to living. So maybe you can even think that there should be some organisms that still manage to survive and are living beneath the surface of Mars. So this motivated us to understand if our model could work in this environment. So what we did is that we just performed the calculation of cosmic shower in different environments that are these prime targets for the search of life in our solar system. So you can see here, this is the plot for Earth. So this is the total radiation dose from all particles. And this is the muon, the polarized muon component. And you see that the muons on Earth, without entering in the details, they start really to dominate at ground level. And then they're still dominating beneath the surface. But for Mars, and this is what I illustrated here, you still have an atmosphere. And but the thing is that the atmosphere is very thin now compared to the Earth. So the muon component will start to dominate underground. So typically at depth of 10 meter water equivalent. So if it's water, it would be 10 meters beneath the surface. So we did it also for bodies without atmospheres. So for example, where the atmosphere is negligible at all, but that could also harbor like oceans beneath the surface. So Enceladus, for example, which is Saturn moons, but you also have Europa, which is Jupiter moons, and the cosmic ray, when they hit the surface, they will also produce these air showers. So the question was at which depth the muon component, which is a spin polarized component, will start to dominate, and what is the radiation dose. So this is a bit different when you don't have an atmosphere, but so typically they will start to dominate at also 10 meters, but then you have a range of depth when actually you have the dominance of muons. So The other question is these doses were calculated for the flux of cosmic rays that we have now. It could have been enhanced if you have powerful events that could have produced cosmic rays nearby, for example, a supernova. So in that case, you would enhance the flux of cosmic rays, but you will not change the depth at which the muon will start to dominate. So the radiation dose from the spin polarized component would be enhanced by something like, depending on the models, it could be even 3 orders of magnitude. But it will not last, of course. It's something like 4,000 years. But it could have an effect on the mutation, of course. And I mean, these are quite high doses. So now we need to understand better if spin polarized cosmic ray could have a differential effect. Because we have many environments that actually the muons dominates at some depth. And I mean, they could make a difference. Again, maybe it has to be tested. So this is like, I mean, what I'm trying to develop is like collaboration between, I mean, astrophysicists and biologists and experts in biomolecular engineering, because we need to understand how the spin polarized cosmic rays interact with the biological molecules. Again, what we did is not even involve the quantum mechanical interaction. And this is needed to understand even effect like the chiral-induced spin selectivity. But for the mutation, for the specific effect of the spin polarized radiation, you also need to work with biologists and experts in radiation damage. So for the air showers, I presented it already. And for the experiment, I mean, you need to find sources of spin polarized radiation. So we have collaboration to design this type of sources with people from Stanford and SLAC, but I also collaborate with muon beams, I mean, with the experiment involving the muons at J-PARC in Japan, which is a muon beam facility. And also maybe here we could use the laser to actually create a muon source, because these muon sources are not something that you can easily find. And the muons, for example, they could induce also enantioselective chemistry, because when they are captured, they retain some of their spin polarization. So to summarize, the origin of homochirality is a fundamental problem. It's connect biology, chemistry, and physics. We don't know yet if the specific handedness that we witness on Earth is due to chance, or is it due to some deterministic scenario, which was invoked by Pasteur, and since the parity violation in the weak interaction was discovered by all the researchers that tried to connect it to the handedness of living systems. We don't know if it happened, this homochiralization, in the prebiotic or the biotic stage, in which environment. For the part I was working on, muons seems to are better than electrons because they are retaining their ludicity. So to make this, this possible effect, we need to understand how the muons make mutations. And if spin polarized muon can induce enantioselective mutagenesis, also in different environments. So this is what I showed, because the muons will not dominate in every environment. You need the shower induced by the primary cosmic ray that has time to develop. You need enough grammage to have this muonic component. And that I already said, that we need to understand if the time scale is sufficient to make homochiralization. And this is a testable idea, because enantioselective mutagenesis in general has not been, I mean, tested yet by laboratory experiments. So it's just very interesting to see if there is any response from bacteria, for example, to spin polarized radiation. So thank you. And I will be happy to take questions. I think I went really fast. So
All right. Thanks a lot, Noemi. Yeah, that was great. Very interesting idea. And yeah, so the floor is open for questions. Let me just start with a question I had. How do you model air showers on Earth and in different planets? What kind of code do you use?
so let me show my screen. So we use MCEQ, which is a code developed by Anatoly Fedinich. And we also compared with Fluka, which is a remote code. And but this code is faster. So you have the details in the paper. And this is what we use. And we provided also the GitHub link. So, I mean, if anyone wants to use it to calculate, I mean, we just can go
Cool.
to the GitHub.
Definitely have a look. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe I can ask a very elementary question. Your talk had many interesting ideas, and I only understood part of it. And so I'll ask something that's not necessarily the most fundamental thing. Your idea is that there is a small bias that you can calculate, but that somehow would be amplified, I don't know, by some evolutionary tendencies.
Yes.
But won't there be constant destabilization of this observed homochirality exactly by the mechanism you are talking about? Because the bias is only very small. That means there is most of the time, in fact, only a small balance between one type of chirality and another. And also, I'm not sure what the role of neutrinos is. Neutrinos are chiral one way, right? Left hand chirality. Um,
But the interact,
you,
so I
yeah,
mean, the
maybe you could explain it a little bit more.
I mean, the cross section for interaction is so small that they don't make mutations. So
But neutrinos pass through every object, many fold larger than cosmic rays, isn't that right? I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, okay. All right. I buy your answer on that.
interact. So the thing is that you need some. The radiation is actually ionizing the molecules. So you need to have a damage. So it's true that they are almost chiral, but they do not interact. So I mean,
Okay.
it's so small that it will be, the effect would be so tiny that it's not going to be competitive with even maybe the parity violating energy differences scenarios. So the thing is
Okay.
that
I will think about this. But what about the destabilization that must be occurring constantly? Isn't that the case or not?
what do you mean by destabilization?
So you have certain observed homochirality, but then the mechanism that you described is has only a small bias. That means there must be events that are occurring with opposite chiralities nearly all the time. So even if somehow a small bias would set you up in one direction, they will constantly be bombarded by events of other chirality, opposite chirality. Am I thinking something totally strange?
But on average, you have one ludicity in the
Sure.
cosmos.
Average, you have one ludicity, but then it's a fluctuating quantity, right? Highly fluctuating quantity.
Yes, but the
So,
idea is that because it's, I mean, it's on average, it's always the same sign, and because it's always irradiating, which is not like this chiral impulse, right? Because you for biology, you need something which is constant. Of course, this is speculative. Again, it has not been tested, but what we did is that we showed that if you have two populations that are a mirror image of one another, and if you introduce this small but constant bias after some time scale, and the question is, how long is it? Because if it's too long, of course, it's not competitive with the other scenarios, and it will not work. So yes, I mean,
I will not insist on this any further.
what you're saying is that it might be too small, but I'm saying, yes, we need to probe this.
When you have a huge fluctuation in a system that goes both positive and negative, the bias may be only in one direction, and if it is small, but these fluctuations have a huge effect. But I will let it go for now. But I will also think a little bit. Maybe you could say a little bit more about what people think about the relation between weak chirality or weak interactions and chirality. You said something, but you said the effect is too, the energy is too small at the weak interaction level. Is that what you said?
Well, this is this
Yeah,
paper.
yeah.
Alam and quarks. So this is not something I'm working on, but I know that there are many papers in the literature that even now people are trying to see if there is a possibility to have this phase transition. So again, it could be very small and you could have fluctuation as well, but it's also something that it's this would be promising also if it worked, because it involves the weak interaction directly. So here it's like if you have a source of circularly polarized light, and if, for example, this is not linked to the weak interaction, then at the end, what you get is also not deterministic, right? Because it could have, it's like happening by chance. This chiral impulse, which has some sign, it will not necessarily be the same everywhere in the universe, correct? But when you link it to the weak interaction, and this is why it's also funny in this hypothesis that is energy selective mutagenesis, is like everywhere it would have the same sign if it's true. And same for this, because this, if you manage to have this phase transition, this parity violating energy difference is linked to the weak interaction. So the sign you predict for the handedness would be the same on Earth and somewhere else in the universe. It's not the handedness we observe would be not due to a fluctuation, to chance.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, Axel, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, Naomi, for a very interesting presentation. I have a question regarding meteorites. There we do observe some chirality, and my question is there a possible way of explaining your mechanism with air showers, even on the scale of meteorites?
And that's a good question. The thing is that we showed that in our mechanism, when you have amino acids, the effect is smaller than if you have helical molecules. Then it could be involving some chemistry with muons that we don't know, and we should, understand this better, because muons, when they are trapped, they also retain some of their polarization. So that, I started to investigate and to ask chemists if there could be some, NR2 selection due to the chemistry involving muons, but maybe it would be small as well. For now, there is no, there is, apart from this, maybe model that involve UV CPL light, because this is shown to work in laboratory, right? There is no common, how can I say, model to explain why there is this. And even maybe, some people that, I've read papers say that it could be even biogenic, right? So it's like the traces of, life that is now extinct, and that produced these excesses. So that would be, I mean, maybe we don't really know. And it could be earth contamination as well, because some of these error bars are quite large. So this is why we wanted to see in situ with these missions, like, look, if there are still excesses in amino acids. But I think that, to just answer your question regarding the cosmic rays, it's not very promising just by ionization for the differential destruction, but maybe it could be linked to some chemistry with muons that we haven't investigated yet.
Yes. All right. Yeah. Thank you. But why did you classify your mechanism under transbiotic? It could be transbiotic, but it could also be prebiotic. Could it not be?
Because the effect is now shown when you have a helical molecule. So to have a helical structure like this, okay, I mean, if it's polymerization and if it starts to, before the, I mean, the mutation, if you introduce a differential in the mutation, you will have homochiarylization because the growth is exponential. If no, you need a second step. And what I just said is that I should maybe say just biotic, but I wanted to also put the chiral-induced spin selectivity somehow. It could have also affected as well. That you have the effect which is due to the helical structure itself.
Yes. And you, of course, to have any mutation, of course, you need life in some sense, or at least transbiotic life.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Very nice topic also.
Yeah. Self-replication is not the unique definition for life.
Yes.
I don't know how to define life. I just put transbiotic. But
sure. Yes. Of course, I agree. Yes.
So, thank you.
I don't see any questions. Does anybody has a question? Just write it in the chat box, raise your hand.
Now, I think so.
If not, then yeah, let us stop then. Thank you. Thanks, Noemi. Thanks, everyone. See you all next week. And yeah, Noemi, let us talk.